The Artiphon Orba 2 is finally here. Did it fix the shortcomings of the original? What's up and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Artiphon recently released the Orba 2, the sequel to their weird little orb-shaped music production gadget, which I reviewed the original quite a while ago. And while I thought the overall idea was cool, I had some major problems with it. It was pretty substantially unfinished and had a bunch of missing features that made it not quite unusable, but definitely janky. Now, full disclosure, Artiphon did send this over for review, but as per usual, they have no say over the content of any of my videos, and I will be equal parts praising and critical of this thing. So to understand the criticisms I originally made and the improvements that they have made and whether this is something that you should even consider buying, let's get quickly into what this even is. The Orba is a weird cross between a handheld drum machine, synth, looper, and groovebox. It kind of floats somewhere in the middle of that. And also a sampler, but the capabilities of that are somewhat limited. We'll get into that. Regardless, the basics are that you play sounds on this little radial key bed, either drums or synths. I can cycle through them like this, or I can directly select them. And it responds to your touch in a few different ways. So for instance, let me go back to these chords. Up and down these little slices, you can hear the cutoff closing and opening up. Or some elements can have vibrato if you go back and forth, which is kind of fun. And it's even sensitive to position, so if you pick it up and like rotate it, you can hear changes in the sound. And you can see this reflected on the app. It does a pretty good job of showing visually what movement and what positioning it's picking up. I'll get back to the app a little bit later. Regardless, it's sensitive to its rotation, position of your fingers on the keys, and of course, velocity. And it gives haptic feedback by default, which can be disabled, so it like vibrates a little bit, much like the motor in your phone does. So it does feel fairly satisfying to play. Although, of course, it is kind of weird and takes some getting used to. I think often you're meant to kind of cradle it in your hands like this, but for the purposes of this video, I'll probably have it more just directly on the table for ease of demonstration. The idea is that you can use the Orba as either an expressive MIDI controller, either via USB-C or via Bluetooth, or you can use it self-contained. It's got its own little synth engine and a basic sampling engine, and you would use its looping capabilities to build up a little beat directly on the unit, completely standalone, just in the palms of your hands, which is pretty cool. So up next, let me actually just show you the process for making a quick little beat. In this case, the one that you heard in the intro. So first of all, I can set my tempo. Just tapping it out like that. And I should also note that if I want to select an instrument manually rather than cycling through them, I can hold down the middle button and just select them that way. This is also, like I showed you a second ago, how you're going to set your tempo and how you're going to operate record and play pause. So I'm in drum. So let me hold this down and hit record, and it won't actually start picking up notes until you play something. So there's not a formal count in, but you can treat it like a count in. That stops the loop. And you can see the progress on these little lights as it travels through the loop if you ever get lost. It's still recording. I need to stop that recording. So by default, quantization is turned on. This is a big step up from the original Orba, which did not have quantization. This has it built right in from the get-go. And because it's a bit of a weird instrument to try to play, especially if you're holding it in your palms, having quantization just built in is kind of non-negotiable, at least for most stuff for me. So we've got our drum part, and I'm going to switch to, let's do a melody. Also, I should mention that if you want to start the loop from the very beginning, hold down the middle button and then hold this down for like a second. And it sometimes misses the first note for me, but it's there. See, there it is. There's a full revolution of it. And I had the first note, but when it first plays it, it always misses that first kick, which is odd. But whatever, we can deal with that. That's fine, I suppose. So I goofed that up immediately. So to erase that, I hold down this and record and let it go for a full revolution. Or I can hold down the middle button and shake it. Wait for it. That's pretty cool. I like that. It's gimmicky, but it's kind of fun. So you do kind of have to plan ahead with your initial loops, because that's what you're stuck with now, that length. So that's the basic beat making / looping experience. This is Gabe from the future, by the way. I forgot to record a transition between these two sections, so here we are. By now, you've probably noticed that I haven't actually switched out any of the sounds that I'm working with. To do that, you need to connect the Orba to the app, either the smartphone app or the computer app. In this case, I'm going to demonstrate it using the smartphone app because that's just more portable. That's the solution that most of us are probably going to end up using, and it's pretty visual and easy to demonstrate. And for most functions, it can just connect to your phone via Bluetooth, which is nice and easy to set up and easy to work with, although there are a couple of exceptions where you will need to connect to your phone via USB, but I'll get into that in a bit. For now, let's jump into the app. So to set this up, you download the Orba 2 app. This is already powered on, so let me go to the next step. You choose your device and get it connecting. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but regardless, my Orba is now connected. If I swap between these, I can swap between the different elements, much like you'd expect it to be able to. So then if I want to change my preset, I go to the list of presets and I can scroll around and select something else. By default, I believe you have to send to Orba, and then once you've done it once, you can just select it and it'll be a lot more instantaneous. And it's going to take a second to really think about it. You'll notice it didn't actually change yet. There it goes. And you'll also notice that if you scroll through here, it wants to accidentally open anything that you happened to touch, which is really annoying. And I don't appreciate, see, it's doing it right now. Regardless, this is going to be how you swap out the sounds on this thing. And they've got their whole factory library of sounds to work with. So for reference, let me just switch out a drum kit. Maybe something else. And in addition, if I go back to play here, you can pull up the tempo and key settings. So you can change between major and minor and the key that you're in. I wish there were more options for setting scales and such, but that's probably asking a bit much. This is also where you're going to change the quantization settings, by the way. So you can change whether it snaps to grid, whether it snaps it to kind of its own groovier grid, or whether it doesn't quantize at all. And you can also directly clear different loops and change the volume and reverb and delay sends directly from the app with no connections needed. It's just over Bluetooth. And so if you're using this as kind of a mobile, quick little beat making, idea generating setup, that's pretty self-contained. Would I prefer that it's completely self-contained? Of course I would. But I do like the way that the app is implemented, barring the occasional jank. And of course, some of that could be because I'm on an Android phone. I should note, however, at one point I had the Orba just entirely crash on me. Like, I had sent it some sounds via my computer. We'll get to that in a second. And then I opened up the app, started doing some stuff with it. The app froze and the Orba itself crashed, forcibly rebooted, and reset itself to the state that it was in before I had connected it to the app in the first place, which was very strange. I hope that's not a frequent thing, but that's something that I definitely want to at least mention. But I did promise you sampling capabilities, and this is quite handy to have because, to be completely honest, I'm not a big fan of most of the preset sounds. In fact, this will be a little bit unfair because I'm cherry picking a sound I know to be mediocre, but let me just show you a sound that I find not great, and it's got a few of these fake little violins. I don't know why they really like that violin sound, but I don't love it. And like a lot of these lead sounds are just kind of like, eh. But for balance, here's something that's a little nicer. Or something like this. It's a little more basic, but it's decent. And then once again, for balance, here's a sound I don't love. The way it responds is cool, but I don't love the way it sounds. But fortunately, there's the Orba synth editor, where you can design patches yourself, or you can load on samples to act as synth patches, which is another thing that the previous Orba was unable to do, and this new Orba is able to work with. However, even the implementation of this does leave a bit to be desired. So let me just show you how this works. If I go to sample, I can either record audio directly and save that. I'm going to cancel that for now. Or I can actually go into my file browser and select sounds, maybe that I've downloaded, say, from Splice. But if I want to send one of these self-made presets, I have to connect via USB. I can't just send it over Bluetooth, which maybe that's not surprising. I guess I shouldn't have expected that to work, but now you have to have a third element to this setup if you want to just load custom sounds onto this thing. But if you have already sent a sound to this thing, say maybe on your computer, for instance, these two samples here, I loaded onto this via the computer app, which is roughly equivalent to the phone app. So these two samples have been on this device at one point or another. So if I load it now, this is a sound from my $5 sample pack, link in the description. Now it works. So if you want to have easy access to a bunch of your custom sounds, I would recommend spending some time up front, just kind of batch loading on a bunch of different samples, and then just have them at your fingertips, essentially. Or here's another one. This is from Eliminate's Splice sample pack. Now here's the interesting thing. It actually does try to turn these samples somewhat into patches. So for instance, let me pick up these cables. It actually does have a difference in filter cutoff and add vibrato when you shake the device. Or once again. That's kind of neat, but you'll also notice that these sounds both are best if they ring out for quite a while. But by default, it just kind of cuts them off. But regardless, that ability to load in your custom sounds and then have it kind of remember them is pretty neat. But it's definitely not frictionless, and it still requires an external computer of some sort, either one of these or, you know, a computer. So, with all that being said, here's where we're at so far. The Orba 2 is somewhere between a synth, a very limited sampler, and a looping groovebox. It's very limited, but also it's fairly inexpensive. It's hyper portable, but not all of its functions actually lend itself to portability. It's a gimmicky gadget, but also a cool one. I like when manufacturers go out on a limb and do something weird, even if the idea might be fundamentally flawed or the execution might be a little bit janky. as is the case with this, because I think that you're going to have to use some patience with it. It's still a bit fiddly to work with. And while the experience of using it with the app and switching out sounds is fairly smooth, the experience of loading sounds onto it takes a bit more effort. And I think them advertising it as like the easiest sampler to take wherever is a little bit misleading. And let's say that you use this in what I imagine to be the typical use case. You're sitting on the couch, just casually doodling out a little song idea. Or maybe you're traveling, like on the train doing the same. Just doodle out a little song idea, and then maybe you could turn it into something later, or maybe it just lives on here as an ephemeral little production. If you want to use this as a song ideas sketchpad, however, there's a pretty big limitation to that, because at the moment, you cannot export your songs, you cannot save them. That feature is completely missing. Now, to be very clear, I confirmed with an Artiphon rep that that is coming, and they said very soon. But to be even clearer, never buy a gadget based on promised or theoretical future firmware updates. Wait until those updates are implemented and then consider buying it. And at the time I reviewed the original Orba, it didn't have any sort of song saving or export. And this new one still doesn't have it. So in my opinion, it's still unfinished. Like, they've said it themselves that it's unfinished because they haven't finished adding a core feature yet. So if you make a little musical idea on this thing, it's kind of trapped, sandboxed in a little gadget where to get that idea off of it, you probably have to record it into, say, your audio interface or a handy recorder, or maybe just film it with your phone and use the built-in speaker just to get the general idea across. Otherwise, you just kind of have to like leave it until you have the chance to record it or delete it. That's it. Once again, they said they're going to change that. I'll pin a comment below once they have done that. But as it is, it still feels unfinished and it's still niche. It's a niche tech curiosity / a casual song ideas gadget. It is much improved from the original and capitalizes on the potential that the original had much better, but it's still unfinished. So go in with that in mind. Hopefully, I've been able to show you what the actual user experience of it is like and make clear what it can and cannot do. Cut through some marketing and just show you here's what it is and isn't capable of. And hopefully by now, what I've showed you will help you form an opinion on whether it's worth looking into for you or just worth ignoring. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see some more weird music production gadgetry, you can click or tap up over here somewhere, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.